And for your company, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association is holding a media forum on the status of digital migration and the future of free-to-air television in Ghana. The forum is expected to shed light on thorny issues that have come up on broadcasting on the new platform and provide answers on the best way forward to preserve the crucial role of the media in safeguarding democratic culture in Ghana. We'll take you live to the Elisa Hotel shortly, but before that, let me just bring you some information on the digital migration in Ghana so far. Now, the transition from analog to digital broadcasting involves the development of digital TV set and STB standards and specifications, the deployment of DTT network platform and digital switch on, and a simultaneous transmission of TV services in both analog and digital, that's a simulcast for a period not exceeding 12 months, and the switch off of the analog television service. Now, the objectives of the policy on transition from analog to digital terrestrial television in Ghana include the following: to create policy environment for migration of analog broadcasting to DTT, and for smooth implementation of the DTT network solution, to guarantee the availability of all existing terrestrial analog television stations in digital formats in at least their current existing coverage areas. It's also to create to make available to all existing television households access to digital television services and ensure universal access to free-to-air television services, to ensure the availability of DTT receivers, STB and IDTV that conform to GS 1099 in the market. It's also to, as much as possible, adopt and implement a framework to provide STBs fully or partially subsidized, I beg your pardon, to the citizenry, with emphasis on the aged persons and persons with disability. And to free up relevant spectrum of economic value from the broadcasting service for telecommunication and other services of value to the state. To promote environmental sanity through co-location of broadcast transmission infrastructure, to encourage the promotion of local content towards growth and job creation in this sector. To set up a commercially oriented corporate body, Ghana Digital Company, to run the platform for long-term viability and growth of same. Now, here's the operational structure of the DTT network. There shall be one national DTT platform operator owned by the government of Ghana and solely established to provide exclusive signal and transmission carrier services for authorized FTA broadcasters, that's free-to-air broadcasters. Now, the digital terrestrial platform shall be built to include capabilities for the provision of pay and free-to-view services. The DTT infrastructure platform shall be managed as a commercial entity incorporated as the Ghana Digital Company, GDC. The GDC shall be authorized and allocated frequencies by the NCA, that's the National Communication Authority. Only authorized broadcasters will be allowed on the DTT platform. The NCA shall assign a broadcaster's LCNs according to the date of their first authorization. The GDC will work closely with the NCA and NMC to ensure all channels on the platform are in good standing. It is the policy of the government of Ghana to achieve universal access to digital television services for all citizens of Ghana. Successful migration from analog to DTT means achievement of universal access objective of providing broadcasting services. That's 95% terrestrial and 5% satellite to all Ghanaians, irrespective of location. Now let's take you live to the Alisa Hotel in Shira Ado, head of talk here at the Joy FM Multimedia, is on standby.
And a number of developments have been noted over the period. And this has led to quite a number of different statements from key stakeholders from the ministry as well as from GIBA and other stakeholders in the value chain. Today's forum hopefully will help us understand a lot more what's happening and what this means for you and I who consume media by television. The digital migration is happening. It has happened in many places around the world, and Ghana is still yet to fully migrate, although we currently are in the process. What will this mean to you and I in the near future? And this is exactly why this Broadcast Industry Forum is being brought to you. We're here at the Swiss Spirit Alisa Hotel in Accra, and in a moment we will commence.
We'll take you live there when the actual program begins, but that was in Shira Ado, just giving us some basic understanding on what to expect. But before that, I was giving you some key pointers in understanding Ghana's digital migration journey, and we were at the point of the policy objectives and where we got to universal access. I'll come back to give you more on that, but just as a way of reminder, let's bring you details of the program expected to start anytime soon.
Free-to-air television is under siege in Ghana. Broadcasting in Ghana has gone digital, but what does it mean for you? Make a date with industry-leading experts on Thursday, the 6th of June at Swiss Spirit Alisa Hotel, Ridge, Accra, as we discuss the facts and discover the answers in a broadcast media industry forum dubbed Digital Migration and the Future of Free-to-Air Television in Ghana. This event will be chaired by Mr. Roland Afemorning, President of the Ghana Journalists Association. Speakers include Mr. Ernest Kofi Abuchi, a legal practitioner, Suleiman Brahima, Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, Nana Kwesi Jan Apenting, former Chair of the National Media Commission, Mr. Prince Harry Crystal, Executive Council Member of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, and Mr. Gregory Bensberg, General Manager of Digital 3 and 4, ITV and Channel 4's digital terrestrial services in the UK. In attendance will be members of the Diplomatic Corps, civil society organizations, broadcasters, and allied media service providers, traditional rulers, and representation from the general public. This event will be telecast live on over 200 GIBA member television and radio stations across Ghana. Join our live stream online at www.facebook.com/Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. The general public is invited to tune in to this telecast, and let's share minds together as we discuss the digital migration process, the way forward, and the crucial role of mass media communication through free-to-air broadcasting.
And for staying here on the Joy News channel, and indeed we will be taking you shortly to the Swiss Spirit Alisa Hotel when that conversation begins. But let me bring you some more information on Ghana's digital migration journey and the policy objectives, basically. So the policy of the government of Ghana to achieve universal access to digital television services for all citizens of Ghana, and the successful migration from analog to DTT means achievement of universal access objective of providing broadcasting services to 95% terrestrial, 5% satellite to all Ghanaians irrespective of location. Now, to achieve universal access for digital broadcasting, a combination of satellite and terrestrial transmission systems will be implemented to assure 100% free-to-air television coverage in Ghana for GTV. Private television stations with terrestrial TV authorizations will broadcast only on terrestrial and shall be encrypted on satellite unless requested in writing to have its distribution on satellite in the clear for purposes of being viewed in homes. We take you back now to the Swiss Spirit Elisa Hotel again.
How we go from here to full actualization depends on a number of things. And this morning's Broadcast Media Industry Forum seeks to bring stakeholders together to find ways to make sure that not only do we migrate fully, but that it sets the tone for leaving a legacy that enhances how media work is done and how you and I remain informed. My name is Inshira Ado. I'm the head of strategic projects and business development, as well as thought leadership at the Multimedia Group, and I will be your master of ceremonies this morning. I'd like to start off with a welcome address by the president of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, and that's the person of Andrew Danso Eninkra. Let's welcome him with a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Inshira. Colleague broadcasters, representation from the diplomatic corps and civil society organizations, broadcast media industry and allied services personnel, distinguished guests, fellow media journalists, and all other protocols duly observed. It is a humbling duty for me to welcome all of you to this Broadcast Industry Forum today, Thursday, 6th June 2019, at the Swiss Spirits and Suites Alisa Hotel, Accra. The theme for this forum is digital migration and the future of free-to-air television in Ghana. The Republic of Ghana signed on the Geneva 2006, that is the GE06 agreement establishing the digital terrestrial broadcasting frequency plan in the radio frequency band 174 to 230 megahertz and 470 to 862 megahertz. The agreement set 17th June 2015 as the deadline for the transition from analog to digital broadcasting in the ultra-high frequency UHF bands 4 and 5. This deadline and many subsequent time commitments have been missed by Ghana for various reasons. Now, critical among these reasons is the lack of an agreed clear roadmap and policy document guiding the process in Ghana. Over the years, discussions and agreements that are needed to consolidate the migration process and cement the resolve of key industry players to have a universally accepted platform has been frustrated by ambitions covertly overladen with inexplicable intentions. A draft policy document which has finally been raised only after several agitations and similar forums in the past seem to be infested with undesirable septic shocks that will send the broadcasting industry into terminal coma should implementation be allowed without questions. Per the current draft policy for digital terrestrial television, the Ministry of Communication, MOC, seeks to encrypt all hitherto free-to-air television channels and grant conditional access to viewers subject to the payment of digital access fees. The Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association and other key broadcast stakeholders have expressed discomfort about the draft policy on many grounds. Among others, that the MOC move to encrypt free-to-air television as an affront to media independence and freedom, and a denial of the individual's right to information. Notwithstanding, the MOC has taken steps towards implementation of the said policy, even though it remains a draft. The recent publication by the National Communication Authority prohibiting the distribution of previously approved DTT receivers is an example of such steps taken to realize the draft policy, which has not been validated by the major stakeholders impacted by it. Another related issue is the position by the MOC that the governing board of the Central Digital Transmission Company Limited, CDTL, the company, now we don't know whether the company has been formed or is to be formed, but the company formed to manage the monopoly infrastructure for digital terrestrial television transmission in Ghana is to be appointed by the President without recourse to the National Media Commission, as prescribed by the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana. Key among the questions that have come up in this debate include whether the policy of a monopoly signal distributor is the way to go, the impact of free-to-air encryption on the business of free-to-air broadcasters who rely solely on advertising revenue, whether there are alternatives for funding the national DTT infrastructure and developing allied businesses that supports the digital experience other than encrypting program content, etc., etc. This forum will be ably chaired by the President of the Ghana Journalists Association, will take the form of a discussion by a panel of experts made up of an expert from the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, a senior legal practitioner with expertise in media and telecoms, an executive council member of GIBA, who is well-versed in broadcasting engineering, the executive director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, and some executive members of other associations that are related to the media industry. It is our expectation that this forum will shed light on the thorny issues raised and provide much-needed answers on the best way forward to preserve the crucial role of the media in a digital era while safeguarding the democratic culture in Ghana. We also believe that your participation, as well as the live broadcast on some TV channels, live streaming, blogging, and subsequent discussions will contribute significantly in achieving that end. We are hopeful that the time and resource spent here today will go down the history books of broadcasting in Africa as the turning point in giving voice to the industry in choosing for itself what is best and most preferred over what political authority prescribe and enforce. Welcome all and enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Danso Eninkra. I wouldn't waste any more time. This is a man who doesn't need too much introduction. He's the president of the Ghana Journalists Association, Mr. Roland Afilmoni. Let's welcome him, please.
Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished promoters and entrepreneurs of Ghanaian media organizations, panel of experts, fellow journalists and members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I deem it a great privilege to chair this forum, which gives all of us the opportunity to dispassionately discuss what is thought to be another threat to media freedom and independence, and by inference, the practice of journalism in Ghana. Ghana, like the rest of the world, is transitioning from analog to digital broadcasting. The ability to practice free and fair journalism forms the backbone of information delivery through public service broadcasting to the citizenry, while holding government accountable to the people. This helps the entire Ghanaian population to contribute their quota to nation building. It is our belief that digital migration, with its endless possibilities, will help in the socio-economic development of our nation, Ghana. As we are transitioning from analog to digital broadcasting, practitioners and well-meaning citizens of Ghana are apprehensive about the Ministry of Communications policy to encrypt free-to-air television. GIBA and other stakeholders have also expressed disquiet about the draft policy on the grounds, among other things, that the ministry's move to encrypt free-to-air television is an affront to media independence and freedom, and a denial of the individual's right to information. We may be mistaken in our fears, may be right about them, but one thing we are sure about is that we have a right to be paranoid. Our Constitution guarantees the freedom and independence of the media, the individual's right to information, and the responsibility of the media to hold government accountable to the people of Ghana. Since the advent of the Fourth Republic, these rights and responsibilities have been tested in diverse ways, including decisions by law courts, and today, our law reports are replete with judicial pronouncements upholding the freedom and independence of the media. As media practitioners, we cannot separate the tools we use in carrying out our duties from the content we produce and deliver. We just celebrated World Press Freedom Day last month, and as a nation, we pledged to ensure that the freedom of the media to operate is ensured as it is enshrined in our 1992 Constitution. The purpose of this forum is to ensure that our resolve is actualized, even in this process of digital migration. I urge all participants of this forum, our government, and the listening public to participate and listen with an open mind and, at the same time, with keen interests, as the matters to be discussed here are fundamental to the growth of our ever-maturing democratic culture. Thank you, and God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Afil-Moni. And we're going to dive straight into a couple of presentations, after which we'll have a panel discussion so we can all join in. And if you're tuned into multi-TV or City TV, I'd like to let you know we're live from the Alisa, Swiss Spirit Alisa Hotel here in Accra, and this is the Broadcast Media Industry Forum brought to you by the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. We're live across the country on more than 200 radio and television channels. We also have affiliates around the world, and on the continent, we're broadcasting via channel 421, and also on the GoTV channel 178. We're also on the web. If you go to citynewsroom.com or myjoyonline.com, you'll be able to find the feed there. And also the GIBA, Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association Facebook link also is sharing a live stream of this very important forum. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. He's an executive council member and also a committee member. Very, very well versed in the technical aspects of digital broadcasting. Executive Council of GIBA, representing the free-to-air, and also the chairman for the Legal and Regulatory Ethics Committee. His day job is as Director of Operations for Crystal TV, and also a commissioner member of the National Media Commission in the person of Prince Harry Crystal. He will be presenting next. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
The Chairman, President of Ghana Journalists Association, Mr. Roland Afel Moni, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Honorable Chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Communications and its members, Chairman and members of the GIBA Council of Elders, the President of GIBA, Mr. Danso Eninkra, representatives from the Ministry of Communications, from the Ministry of Information, from the National Media Commission, National Communications Authority, civil society organizations present, traditional rulers, Nananom, fellow members of the Executive Council of GIBA, stakeholders and allied media service providers, GIBA member stations, members of the media fraternity, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'll set the tone for today's forum by letting you know the core of the issues, and then would dovetail into letting you know where we came from and where we are. So today, as per the DTT draft policy we have before us, the Ministry of Communication is requesting that all set-top boxes, and for the benefit of viewers, all decoders must have a conditional access system, or what we call an access control mechanism. And this means that all digital TV channels we are all currently watching will be scrambled, and every TV screen will be blank with no programs to watch, unless Ghanaians buy a new type of decoder, which will be prescribed by the Ministry of Communications, and thereafter, viewers will be charged a monthly fee to enable them access even free-to-air broadcast services. This is the issue. So I'll take you back to where we began as a broadcast industry in terms of migrating analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. So Ghana commenced its digital migration process as early as 2007, whereby the National Communications Authority set up an industry technical committee comprising the state broadcaster, that's the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, the private TV stations represented by the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, that's GIBA, government representatives and other stakeholders, namely the Ghana Standards Authority, National Media Commission, Consumer Protection Associations, Ghana Institute of Engineers, among others, to make recommendations for a complete switchover of all broadcast channels from analog to digital. The extensive stakeholder consultations carried out by the committee resulted in the presentation of the August 2010 report, which is referred to as the Digital Migration Roadmap, to the government on the migration from analog to digital broadcasting in Ghana, which was later approved by the government of Ghana. One major recommendation from the roadmap was the need for both public and private entities, and in this case, GBC and GIBA, to form a public-private partnership in order to successfully deliver the DTT migration from the nation. DTT migration program for the nation. GIBA had its first disappointment when this PPP arrangement shelved or was not upheld. And when the Ministry of Communications decided to have full control over the communication or the infrastructure, after the GIBA stakeholders have contributed immensely with resources in various forms for the realization of the DTT setup. All right, that comes with technicalities, and it happens in. Probably there's a conditional access on the microphone. Digital migration roadmap, also called terrestrial television receiver standard. Terrestrial television is what we abbreviate as DTT. DTT is a poison, but we're talking about DTT. And simply put, to Ghanaians, DTT is digital TV. So the roadmap set up a digital television, short television standard by the Ghana Standards Authority to ensure that all DTT free-to-air set-top boxes or decoders and integrated digital TVs, which we call IDTVs, or in your homes you call it digital TVs, conform to the minimum specifications and to protect
Free-to-air television is under siege in Ghana. Broadcasting in Ghana has gone digital, but what does it mean for you? Make a date with industry-leading experts on Thursday, the 6th of June at Swiss Spirit Alisa Hotel, Ridge, Accra, as we discuss the facts and discover the answers in a broadcast media industry forum dubbed Digital Migration and the Future of Free-to-Air Television in Ghana. This event will be chaired by Mr. Roland Afemorning, President of the Ghana Journalist Association. Speakers include Mr. Ernest Kofi Abuchi, a legal practitioner, Suleiman Brahima, Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, Nana Kwesi Jan Apenting, former Chair of the National Media Commission, Mr. Prince Harry Crystal, Executive Council Member of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, and Mr. Gregory Bensberg, General Manager of Digital 3 and 4, ITV and Channel 4's digital terrestrial services in the UK. In attendance will be members of the Diplomatic Corps, civil society organizations, broadcasters, and allied media service providers, traditional rulers, and representation from the general public. This event will be telecast live on over 200 GIBA member television and radio stations across Ghana. Join our live stream online at www.facebook.com/Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. The general public is invited to tune in to this telecast, and let's share minds together as we discuss the digital migration process, the way forward, and the crucial role of mass media communication through free-to-air broadcasting.
Was to ensure that the draft policy as put together is to guarantee the availability of all existing terrestrial analog television stations in digital formats in at least their current existing coverage areas. Number two, to make available all existing television households access to digital television services and ensure universal access to existing free-to-air television services. But, and this is where the issue is, but in a sharp U-turn, the Ministry of Communications revised the earlier draft policy and introduced new clauses into the current draft policy as follows. And I'm going to talk about just one or two. The network provider shall implement, the word shall implement a conditional access system to facilitate the collection of digital access fee, which will be introduced to replace the existing TV license. This conditional access, in addition, will support the provision of enhanced broadcast services to citizens. The existing set-top boxes without conditional access, as you have in your homes, will be replaced through a voucher system by the network provider to enable continuous viewership of digital television. 2, all licensed free-to-air broadcasters, that is satellite free-to-air broadcasters, terrestrial free-to-air broadcasters, and other types of licensed free-to-air broadcaster will be required to encrypt their signals to support the collection of the digital access fee. And this is very interesting. Interesting on 2 grounds. 1, this is a clause that was introduced in December, noted to be the final DTT draft policy stakeholder forum. And number 2, it bears the question, how do you want a satellite free-to-air broadcaster to encrypt its signal? Are they intending to use the conditional access that the ministry is intending to introduce? Or should they go buy or provide their own conditional access system to run free-to-air satellite service? What happens to satellite channels running free-to-air entering the jurisdiction of Ghana? How do you want to encrypt BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, DWTV, France 24, when their model of service is free-to-air broadcasting? So we do not understand the basis of introducing this clause and saying that free-to-air broadcasters should encrypt their signals. Remember, technically, free-to-air broadcasters on satellite get their frequency parameters not from the NCA. So they do not have any binding relationship with regards to spectrum or frequency with the NCA. So how then do you want to enter into this jurisdiction and start enforcing encryption of free-to-air broadcast service? The DTT draft policy also stated, and my president of GIBA already mentioned, that a 7-member governing board shall be appointed by the president. And in this case, we are not saying the president in power, but regardless of who is in government as the president, will oversee the affairs of the Central Digital Transmission Company Limited, which has been incorporated. Membership of the board shall include, and please take note, the chairperson, 1 representative of the Ministry of Communication, 1 representative of the Ministry of Finance, 1 representative of GBC, 1 representative of GIBA, 1 representative of the public with infrastructure management expertise, and the chief executive officer shall be appointed by the president in accordance with the laws governing appointments of CEOs of state institutions. It is interesting to note that the current draft policy, also from the Ministry of Communication, which has recently been revised, also stated that an estimated 5.8 million households, out of which 4.6 million are TV households. 99% of TV households rely exclusively on free-to-air broadcasting, with a little below 1% subscribing to pay TV. 1 out of the 4.6 million TV households, 1.1 million are poor and vulnerable households who are not in a position to afford digital TV or set-top box. So if this is the statistics drawn from the Ghana Statistical Service and was incorporated by the Ministry of Communications in the DTT draft policy, then why do you want to introduce a conditional access that would charge these 1.1 poor and vulnerable households? All the millions of set-top boxes, and I'm happy to say we have one of the authorized dealers of NCA in the house. They bring in set-top boxes and digital TVs which are fully conformed to the conformance regime. So all these millions of set-top boxes and digital TV sets, already approved and certified by the NCA and currently receiving free-to-air signals, will abruptly stop receiving the free-to-air program contents. What GIBA is saying in this regard is that the Ministry of Communication is overstepping its boundary and now directing free-to-air TV broadcasters to comply with a particular type of broadcast service, which is pay TV, other than what they are currently authorized to offer as classified by the NCA. The free-to-air broadcasters are not just business entities. They render media services to promote information flow to the citizenry and the general public by offering the opportunity for all and sundry to partake in the discourse towards nation building through interactive programming, allowing viewers to freely express their opinions, which contributes to deepening our democracy and the socio-economic development of our nation, Ghana. They also provide a platform to industry or for industry to thrive by publicizing their goods and services for the economic growth of the nation. The free-to-air broadcaster desiring to offer its services to the nation had decided on the type of broadcast authorization that will enable it achieve this aim. And so they went to the NCA and as classified by the NCA to get authorization for free-to-air, knowing very well that we have another authorization for pay TV. Specifications for all types of TV services in Ghana is the mandate of the regulator NCA, and the NCA, backed by the Electronic Communications Act and the National Communication Authority Act, have for the purpose of authorizations classified television broadcasting services based on the platform, the business model, and the nature of the broadcasting entity and the service as follows. And I'll read out just two of these types of classifications. Let me also entreat right now that viewers out there, all those listening to us on radio, and those present in this forum should quickly go to the website of the regulator NCA, www.ncA.org.gh/licensing-authorization/television, and you'll find more of these classifications, and I'll talk about these too. Digital terrestrial pay television is one of the classifications, and it says, as described by the NCA, television broadcasting service comprising a bouquet of services provided over an independent or third-party wireless digital terrestrial television network and which requires television viewers to pay a subscription to watch the television service. An example is DSTV. An example is GoTV. An example is First Digital. An example is Mega Choice and Crystal TV having the same authorization. And then the second classification, digital terrestrial free-to-air television program channel, a television broadcasting service in which a single program channel is broadcast unencrypted and in the clear over a digital terrestrial television network and capable of being received without payment of subscription fees. And this service is what more than 99% of Ghanaians are exclusively relying on, as stated in the ministry's policy document. So what GIBA is saying is that free-to-air television must remain free as classified and authorized by the NCA. Let me liken or give you an analogy. If a free-to-air broadcaster is likened to a driving license holder, this will mean that the Ministry of Communication is asking, for example, that a saloon car driver with a particular class of license should now be forced to drive an articulated truck, which is categorized under a different class of license to enable it use the public road. The services of the pay TV authorization holders is different from that of the free-to-air holder. The fact that more than 99% of households rely on free-to-air broadcasting, as stated by the ministry, is a clear indication that complying to the change in classification of the NCA will also affect those households that rely on free-to-air broadcasting. The decision of the ministry, as earlier stated in the draft policy, to charge all viewers a digital access fee to enable them access free-to-air broadcasting will mean that trading the program contents of the free-to-air broadcaster through the introduction of a conditional access technology. So we go and acquire contents. You buy the AFCON game for about $10 million or probably $5 million or $1 million. And then the MOC decides they put in a key that would unlock whether a viewer should watch or not watch. And the only reason is because they want to monetize, the services and sustain the platform at the detriment of the broadcaster who has gone for this exorbitant rights for the acquisition of contents to serve the same public service in delivering current affair information, news, and all of that to the public. So then, the decision, the conditional access system introduced into the set-top boxes has nothing to do with the transmitted signal, but locks or blocks or scramble the content of the content owner. The only relationship the broadcasters have with the NCA and by extension the Ministry of Communication is the need for spectrum or frequency to deliver their broadcast services. Therefore, decisions relating to content provided by free-to-air broadcasters does not fall within the ambit of the ministry. GIBA is strongly opposed to the proposal to implement a conditional access system, a digital television platform which has been set up primarily to deliver free-to-air television services to the populace. The ministry must not charge viewers to pay a digital access fee to enable them watch free-to-air television, when in fact, it is the broadcasters who will be paying for transmission services on the digital TV platform, and which requires more viewers in their numbers for the sustenance of the free-to-air TV business as classified by the NCA. So not only will the introduction of CA, or conditional access technology, destroy free-to-air broadcasting, but all broadcasting-related services in the country, including television advertising, and the industries that rely on it, because the several needed eyeballs or viewers will be restricted from the continuous viewing of free-to-air television against their rights. GIBA has indicated in other fora that it is not opposed to the idea of raising revenue to support the operations and maintenance of the national DTT infrastructure. We have, in fact, preferred more efficient and cost-effective alternatives for the collection of revenue, which is tried and tested and accepted worldwide and does not infringe on free-to-air TV services nor individual rights of the viewers. But this appears not to have been considered in view of the recent disturbing publications coming from the National Communications Authority, which is seeking to implement the provisions of the Ministry of Communications draft policy document. The publication was an instruction to the general public, and let everybody hear this. Probably a lot of people didn't see the publication in the newspaper. In fact, the publication was first launched on the Facebook page of NCA on the 1st of April. And some of us were believing that it is not true because 1st of April was an April Fool's Day. But on the next day, on the 2nd of April, this publication was made in the Daily Graphic newspaper. So this publication is instructing the general public not to patronize the NCA certified set-top boxes and integrated digital TVs, which conforms to the legally gazetted standard of the Ghana Standards Authority, GS 1099. So the public was also the public notice also directed dealers like Hisense, Hitachi, NASCO, and so on and so forth, LG, Sony, and all of that, to stop manufacturing type-approved receivers, causing financial loss, and this is a big issue. To further compound the problem, my president hinted on the 7-member board, and I also mentioned it. So in addition to this control, creating a monopoly for the reception devices, it further went to talk about the 7-member board, which will be constituted or appointed by the president. And here again, GIBA disagrees with this policy, which will allow the appointments of the board members of a single monopoly DTT infrastructure company to be vested in the president instead of the National Media Commission, in order to insulate the broadcast media from governmental control. These are matters that should concern every Ghanaian citizen, and hence the initiation of this public forum. It is our hope that the discussions will be held dispassionately and towards finding the best way forward in successfully completing the digital switchover and to forestall any further delays of migrating the broadcasting sector. Once again, free-to-air television must remain free as classified and authorized by the NCA, the regulator. God bless our homeland, Ghana. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Prince Harry Crystal. At this juncture, I'd like to make just reiterate that we're live on more than 200 radio and television channels across the country and affiliates around the world. The channels include the Joy News channel on the Multi-TV platform, as well as the City TV channel on the Multi-TV platform, GH1 Net 2, UTV, TV3, OKFM, Oman FM, Star 103.5 FM, CT 97.3 FM, Joy 99.7 FM. We're also on channel 362 and 421 on the DSTV platform and 178 on GoTV, as well as online via Star FM online, City Newsroom, and myjoyonline.com, as well as affiliates across the country and around the world, and on the GIBA Facebook page. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of key stakeholders in the industry, right on the government side, legislature. Mr. Sam Nate George is the MP for Ningo Pram Pram and a member of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Communications. Mr. Ernest Boateng is the Vice President of GIBA and from the Global Media Alliance. Mr. Godwin Avenogbo, a veteran broadcaster and a consultant. You also have a representation from the National Communications Authority, as well as GIFEC, in the person of Mr. Abdul Latif Amadou, and from the broadcast fraternity, Mr. Kwabna Anochi Adisi of the EIB Group, Stella Wilson Ejapong, also from Ken City Media, Samalata Mensa from Omni Media Limited, operators of City FM and City TV, and Mr. Kwesi Chum of the Multimedia Group. I will bring you more acknowledgements in a moment as we proceed. At this point, our second presentation will be done by a man who has been working on this right from the beginning. He's seen the journey of the digital migration right from the UK, from his experiences at the ITU, and I'm sure that he'll bring us some interesting perspectives that we ought to consider as we make our own journey. So Gregory Bensberg is the General Manager of Digital 3 and 4. This manages the broadcasting of ITV and Channel 4, both of which are digital terrestrial services in the UK. And he previously worked as a policy and technical expert at Ofcom, which is the UK's version of the NCA. And in a nutshell, the man knows his onions, and so let's welcome him with a round of applause. You can Google the rest of his information. There you go, sir.
Thank you very much. Right, I might just move these microphones out of the way. We seem to have quite a lot piling up here. I'll put them down here. So thank you very much for that introduction and also for the kind invitation to speak to you today. I'm obviously not deeply embroiled in Ghanaian politics and the broadcasting policy. What I've been asked to do is more give you some context of the sorts of issues which you're facing now have been managed in different parts of the world, specifically in the UK, but also within the European Commission, who regulates and imposes regulations on broadcasters across Europe to manage these sorts of issues. So what I'm going to do first of all is just talk a little bit about international context, and I think that's important because whilst you're facing a very specific issue to do with conditional access and encryption of your services, the broadcasting environment around the world is facing massive pressures. And I guess it's always worth remembering that those pressures will not go away, and it's important that you're strong enough to be able to resist those. So having situations which weaken you, diminish your audience, make products more difficult or expensive, probably makes it more difficult for you to fight back against the rise of people like Netflix and Amazon. I'll then talk about some case studies which we found in the UK, and this is specific about how integration of technical solutions in set-top boxes can limit markets and actually make the things more expensive and difficult to manage, and draw some conclusions at the end. And at some point, we'll move. No.
Let's try this and see if it's the direction in which you're pointing.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just turn this off and turn it back on. Okay. Good.
Okay, we have a remote, a remote operator on with them. So if you go to the next slide, could you? So the key point I want to make here is the fact that live broadcasting is under massive pressure from around the world. That said, in the UK, the amount of actually live broadcast content being viewed by people has actually remained moderately unchanged over the last 5 years. So once we've had the growth of video on demand, the growth of these global players, the actual impact on UK viewing so far has been modest. The reason for that is that the UK broadcasters actually were prepared and preparing themselves for the ability to compete with that, providing their own services, but also making their own content compelling and attracting audiences into the market. The issue which actually is affecting people more is the pay television companies who are being threatened by the growth of VOD services, and certainly in America, cord cutting as it's called, people cutting the cable subscription they've got and going over to effectively on-demand video on demand services, has meant that the actual impact on the pay market in America and starting to see in Europe is actually quite increasing. So the key point on this really is that the FANGs, these Facebook, Amazon, Apples and all of that, are posing a massive threat to both broadcasting in pay, but also in advertising revenue. And the important thing for all broadcasters around the world, especially free-to-air broadcasters, is being able to be strong enough to compete back to them, make sure you have a compelling proposition, make sure that your market actually is open and able to respond to these threats as they come along. There's some slides here which are detailed. I won't go through them. They're for reference, so if people want to look into those later on, they're very welcome to do so. This is just showing the impact of the different markets around the world. At the bottom, you can see the countries. So we have UK, we have Nigeria over here, we have China. What this shows really is that there's a wide divergence of how different countries operate television services. They all have free-to-air tiers within them. Some are packaged within satellite, some packaged within terrestrial. Some are starting to see growth of IPTV. Some still, as you can see, have analog terrestrial, Nigeria and Brazil amongst them. So we have quite a diverse range of broadcast offers around the world. But what we actually do have is quite a mixture and a compelling mixture of all these markets exhibit between having a strong free-to-air component of the service and a strong conditional access-driven pay element of the service. So I think that's the main message I want to get across from these sorts of slides. This is more statistics about the UK. If you carry on going, and again, so we go through all of these to the next section. That's right. And again, and onto the next slide. So that was a slightly bit of context, and say those slides are there for reference later on. What I wanted to do a little bit was just talk about how conditional access works, because it's quite important to understand how the system would operate, and if you're a free-to-air broadcaster, how that would affect your service. We've obviously already heard a lot about the set-top box needing to have the conditional access equipment built into it, requiring new set-top boxes and all of that. What you've also got actually is quite a lot of equipment and new systems being required to operate at the head end, where your playout is, where your input and transmitters are. These all have to be consistent, compatible with the CA system which is being used. They all require, generally, a single person to operate a conditional access system. So the thing about CA, to be secure, it's got to be controlled by one entity. It's got to be put in a very secure environment to make sure that it's not pirated, people don't get access to illegal smart cards and all of that. What that generally means is that when you've actually got a system, no, I've got it here. Got a system here where you've got the scramble and the control word insertion, which is all the elements which actually encrypt the service. You've got to get your content to that point. The most likely scenario, I would think, is that that point will be somewhere in the CRA, and therefore all content which happens to be encrypted and scrambled would have to be delivered to this point to get the scrambling done. You may have one or two other points around the country, but it's an important thing to note is that you've actually got to get content to this point and then back to your transmitters again, which will add quite a lot of cost and complexity to the process. So this is an additional thing to think about, as well as the issues to do with set-top boxes and costs and all of that. When we're talking about conditional access, there's quite a lot here about how the thing works, and again, I won't go into that in the interest of time. If we go on to the next slide. Key thing, go up actually, back to that one. No, the third-party content one, sorry. That coverage of free aid, yeah. So, key thing on when you've got a conditional access system is how do you carry different sorts of content. So, some countries actually have situations where they regulate the governance of how these services are carried and paid for. The UK specifically did that. Sky, who were the dominant pay TV operator in the UK, wanted a transition to digital satellite services in 1998, and the ITC, who I was a part of at that time, put regulations in place to make sure that when Sky did conditional access services, it made sure that it only charged customers of those fair, reasonable rates, but also made sure that they guaranteed that anybody who wished to have access to the service could do. That was important to make sure you didn't have one company dominating the conditional access services. The provider of this technology didn't actually exclude competitors from the market. So that was a very important first element of that. When you're trying to put free-to-air into a conditional access system, it's more complicated because, as we say, I've got these three options of how free-to-air operates. The very first one here, if you put free-to-air services in the basic tier of your conditional access service, they are no longer paid, they're no longer free, and therefore we've lost that benefit of having easy access to the services. So in terms of Ghana, that wouldn't make any sense, because actually people have to pay doubly to get the services. The more normal scenario would be the second option, where we have free-to-air services are available without charge, but viewers are required to get an authorised set-top box and an authorised smart card. And this is a situation which I understand is being proposed for Ghana. That means you do have complexity. Set-top boxes, smart cards, authorizations have to be done all the time. You need quite a lot of oversight and infrastructure to manage that. Key issue from that, which we'll come on to in a minute as well, is that once you've started to do that, the set-top boxes you have in your market are proprietary to your market, and therefore you cannot just buy a set-top box or television from around the world. And we have quite a big experience in the UK of introducing this sort of market entry when DTT was first launched, not working very well at all, and I'll come on to that in a minute. The final option, which is much more open and much more flexible, is that free-to-air services can be available with set-top boxes, and they don't need a smart card to be authorised. So basically, they're not encrypted. You can have a set-top box which has the encryption for the pay services or for the limited services, but other services are not required to do so, and that's very easy to manage on a set-top box design process. So, of the three, the more open and the easiest way to operate it is the bottom one. It allows conditional access to be adopted for those people who wish to have it, but it doesn't require mandatory action for that for everybody to do it. Go on to the next one. Another thing to do with not just conditional access, but also digital television is EPG listings. And it's an important element, again, of access, but also prominence about the role. EPGs are the main way most viewers, certainly when going into digital for the first time, can find out what's on. EPGs require the broadcasters to provide information about their content, the schedule, up to 7 or 8 days in advance maybe, and some operator to manage and coordinate that. So quite often the CA provider and the EPG provider end up being one and the same person. So I think a very important question to ask is, if someone is managing the conditional access services, what is their policy on EPGs? What's their allocation policy? What's their charging policy on that? And if we go down to the next slide, this is an illustration of how the UK's EPG operates. This is Freeview Play, which is a new version of Freeview being launched in the last few years in the UK. It's an interactive version with free-to-air. Key point I want to point out, though, is at the top of the EPG, we have the main public broadcast channels. And that's actually a regulation, again, which Ofcom put in place, and that requires that EPGs have to make sure that the main public services are given prominence on EPGs and given open access on all platforms. So that's a way which the government have put in place to ensure that public broadcasters have a good access to all the viewers, because they actually are delivering public benefit rather than just commercial benefit. Okay. So this is the case study I was going to talk about for the UK. In the UK, we launched, as you probably know, DTT, the first in the world, in 1998. There were 6 licenses awarded by the ITC, as it was at that time. One One of them went to the BBC, one of them went to Digital 3 and 4, which is now who I actually happen to work for, and that carried the main commercial public service broadcasters across the country. The remaining 4 licenses effectively were commercial licenses, and they were available for lots of broadcasters who wished to buy capacity onto the market. Those licenses were awarded, the 3 of them were awarded to a company called On Digital, which is owned by ITV at that point. And what they planned to do was do a pay service. So they wanted to do a pay service, and they wanted their set-top boxes to incorporate conditional access in that to allow them to charge viewers for pay services. But similar to the model I mentioned earlier on, the free-to-airs just went straight through with no requirement for encryption. So we had that model at the bottom where free-to-air were unencrypted, the pay were encrypted. And we go to the next slide. However, there was a problem with this in that when at launch there were very few DTT products in the market. Because On Digital were basically subsidizing set-top boxes to drive the market, they insisted that set-top boxes included their conditional access. And what we found was that manufacturers were very reluctant to support the products into the UK market. So products were very expensive and quite limited range of services available. That wasn't the only problem for ITV Digital. It was one of the problems. It meant that the market didn't grow very quickly. I think they had about 500,000 subscribers within about 3 years of launch, but it really wasn't enough. They made some fairly adventurous investments in football rights, which was probably the bigger cause for them going bust, but they did indeed go bust in 2002, and the licenses returned to Ofcom and to ITC. So when they collapsed, the ITC advertised the licenses again for a new type of operation. Some of the bidders were proposing a very similar pay TV model for those 3 licenses. Some were being quite brave and saying, well, actually what we want to do is make everything free-to-air, because we think everything being free-to-air would give a much greater range of services to viewers. It would allow manufacturers to put in, effectively, independent boxes and televisions into the market and allow the market to grow much more quickly. The calculation was that if you can get an audience above about 1 million households, free-to-air starts paying its own way. The broadcasters get enough money from advertising to actually pay for the content they're putting on. Below that, it's very hard. So the risk was, or the calculation was, if you can make everything open and free, the market will go very quickly, and that would actually give critical mass for content to be funded by advertising. And that indeed was what happened. So Freeview, as it was called, was launched in October 2002. It had a huge impact on the market with a large number of new products coming onto the market within a year of the launch. And the entry price of set-top boxes. So On Digital, ITV Digital's day, they were about £200 UK per box. In about 3 years after Freeview was launched, they were down below £40 for a set-top box, and digital televisions were proliferating, so they were across the entire market segment. And that little extract here, this was 2007. This was a press release which actually said that Freeview had overtaken Sky in the number of households which had Freeview as its primary service. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see just about on this picture, this is showing the share of market for different platforms in the UK, starting from 2001 and going through to 2013. This one here, the blue, is a digital terrestrial, and this one here, the bottom one, is pay satellite. And what you can see from the launch, well, 2001, DTT hardly grows at all, doesn't move much at all, whereas satellite is growing very healthily. So that means people were converting to digital, but DTT wasn't really having a big impact on that. But from 2002 onwards, what you can see is that DTT starts increasing rapidly in the number of the service and number of households taking the service up. Whereas, ironically enough, satellite levels out and indeed in some points starts dropping. This was dropping around digital switchover when a lot of analog viewers at the last minute were converting to digital, and their natural preference was to go for a free-to-air terrestrial replacement rather than a pay satellite platform. So what we can see really, it's quite a big tipping point in the market, is that once the broadcasters actually had, once an open market approach to standards, set-top boxes, televisions, free-to-air broadcasting, that market took off, and the opportunities for everybody actually grew substantially. So there's obviously parallels to what you're facing in Ghana, in that if you limit the technologies and limit the options for how people can participate in the market, and you include costs to consumers, it's quite likely that that will slow the market down. And that's why I opened up by talking about the threats the markets are facing, because if you're facing lots of threats, not just from your internal competitors, but from global competitors, you need to be very strong to be able to resist them. So having a strong domestic market, to my mind, is one of the key ways of managing that sort of approach. 3 slides on e-regulations. This is a very legal and very boring subject unless you're a lawyer maybe or a policy expert, so I won't dwell on it too much for you. Key things I want to point out really is that the European Commission, they provide oversight and common regulations across all of the European members. It's important they find that to do that. That creates, in one sense, a level market, but it also imposes minimum standards for how those markets operate. And they've always been very keen to make sure that the broadcast market is open and transparent in operation. The people operating gateways, like conditional access systems or technologies, do so in a very open manner. So the first regulation I was going to talk about was actually introduced in 1995. And this basically is a TV Standards Directive. And it's got a number of provisions, but the key one is that the TV receivers have to adopt international standards for transmission of television services. So this was before the standards were actually developed, and I actually was developing the standards in DVB at that time, but it was very helpful that the European Commission said, if you want to launch digital services in Europe, you have to. And as it was, DVB were the only ones in town, so DVB became the de facto standard. What it also required was that integrated television receivers have to have a common interface. Common interface is a means where you can plug in conditional access functionality to what is an open standard receiver. It's a way, basically, for people upgrading television receivers or set-top boxes to have conditional access if they wish to do so, but doesn't require them to actually fit it in any particular place. And the common interface standard is a standard. Public standard is a very easy thing to adopt and not too expensive. And therefore, this was thought to be a way whereby conditional access providers didn't have to embed their technology into products to make them available. And thirdly, when broadcasters are operating conditional access systems, and the European Commission made specific things about technical services. These are the encryption services, the message entitlements, the management of smart cards, the driving of markets. When operators do that, they were required to offer all broadcasters technical services on this FRND. So FRND stands for fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory basis. That means they can't favour their own services, that the prices they charge customers have to be relating to the costs and the benefits incurred. They can't be disproportionate for that. So that was a very important setting of the market, how the market should operate going forward. Go on to the next one. So this was repealed in 2002, but replaced with a new framework directive, and that effectively put in much more general competition approaches to these sorts of issues. So whilst the principles were intact, they took away the specifics because the market was diverging quite quickly at that point. But one thing they did say, additional to that, was if you're doing interactive services, you have to operate those in a very similar manner as you have done for broadcast services. So it was preparing the ground to saying that just broadcast and interactive are important to consumers, and common standards and common approaches are equally important to operate those. And the last regulation I'm going to talk about is the Universal Services Directive in 2002 as well. And what this does and did was allowed member states to actually nominate certain of their broadcasters as effectively essential broadcasters for the country and require all platforms to carry them. These are called must carry. Generally, countries select their public service broadcasters to be nominated for that. And what this does, it means that every platform has to carry them. And again, there are words at the bottom here about FRND. They have to be carried on a reasonable basis. Some might say carried free, some might say just on a nominal cost basis. But it makes the whole point of this is to make sure that everyone has access at no extra cost to free-to-air services or the public services in all products and all services and all platforms in the country. And that was, again, very important to make sure that if you're doing a platform and a variety of platforms in the countries, the PSBs always get through and always get through without any mitigation or anybody in the way of it. So, conclusions. First one, which I started off on, linear TV is under huge pressure from online services. It's maybe not substantial at this stage in Ghana, but it will emerge. The more internet you have, the more people are connected, the more that threat and that challenge will emerge. And therefore, it's important to be aware of that and able to respond to it. At the moment, certainly in the UK, the public broadcasters are responding very well. Their audience share, their viewers share, their eyeball share is holding up well. But it does require a lot of investment. There are threats to the younger audiences they hold, and that's one of the issues they're having to think about most carefully with this content, but also making sure that their content's available elsewhere as well. Conditional access systems are good for providing revenue streams for pay TV, but they can also be used, I think it was mentioned earlier on, to limit the geographical coverage of free-to-air services when you've got rights issues and you've only got the rights for a certain territory. So CA is a very useful thing for that. That generally applies to satellite, not terrestrial services. And indeed, there are some slides at the back of this pack talking about the UK public broadcasters use CA when they launched digital satellite services originally because the beam width of Astra was too wide. So that's a very useful thing. But a key issue about management of CA systems is that you need to manage the regulations very carefully and be very aware of the consequences of what things can happen. Key issue really is people managing CA systems have to operate in a fair manner, a transparent manner, and that viewers don't get disproportionately complex systems to limit competitive access. Key lesson from the UK experience is that by limiting set-top box design, including additional features, adding cost to consumers, limit that market opportunity, and therefore you'll find you have a smaller market share of those services than if you didn't actually have that. And as I say, the Freeview was very dramatic. The change in how the market responded and the take-up of audience was dramatic within a year of Freeview being launched. So you can see there is a consequence of these, and I think that's one of the things which is worth maybe putting to your government to make out that you might damage terrestrial rather than enhance it by doing this. That's all. So hopefully that was clear. I didn't speak too quickly. No one waved at me to tell me to slow down, so hopefully that was all right. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gregory. And I think he deserves another round of applause. For a non-technical person, you did make a lot of sense. So I think he did justice to the subject matter. So we're going to go into our panel discussion in a moment. But before then, a very recent engagement or an interview on a program at GH1 involving the two Georges. One is a first name and the other was a surname. So there was an interaction between the Deputy Minister of Communications, Mr. George Ander, and Mr. Samuel Nate George. And so we're just going to watch that briefly, and then I'll hand over to Bernard Avler, who will handle the discussion on the panel. But it gives a certain context of where we've come from and where we are now, and hopefully we can find a way from here. So ladies and gentlemen, please watch this next video.